Dr. Ravi Chellam has been involved with wildlife research, education, and conservation since the early 1980s. His career includes stints with the Wildlife Institute of India, the United Nations Development Programme, the Ashoka Trust, WCS, Foundation for Ecological Security, Madras Crocodile Bank, Foundation for Ecological Security, and Greenpeace. He studied Asiatic lions in Gir for his PhD, and it's the memory of this work that made me reach out to him and said, Ravi, will you talk to us about Asiatic lions in Gir? He spent many moons doing field research, surveys, and preparing plans to translocate and establish a second population of free-ranging lions in India. He's an expert scientific advisor to the Supreme Court of India, and he was also, for a time being, the research coordinator of the Wildlife Institute. It's just fantastic to have you on Big Cat Conversations. I still remember how influenced I was with your work on the Asiatic lion when we were at the Wildlife Institute together, and it's been a long journey since, and it's great to reconnect. Ravi, please tell us a little bit more about your work. I could carry on and on about the work you've done all these years, but over to you, and really looking forward to this.
Thanks, Latika, for the warm welcome and introduction. Rather than talk about myself, I think we should just delve into the lion story. We have about 30 minutes, and I thought I will give a quick update on the ecology of the species, but more importantly, focus on the conservation issues that we're having to deal with here. So this is the subject of the conversation today, the Asiatic lion. And as we are all familiar, the lions evolved in Africa and then through a process of natural dispersal came to India. Fairly recently, this subspecies of lions were known as Panthera leopardica, but recent genetic studies have clearly established that the lion population in Western Africa, Central Africa, and the extinct lion population of North Africa and the Asiatic lions all belong to the same subspecies, Leo. It's the Eastern and Southern African lion populations which belong to the second Panthera Cheetah. So lions in Africa used to live from the Atlas Mountains all the way down to the Cape. Unfortunately, but for the Sahara Desert, unfortunately, largely due to human action, large parts of the range of the lions have become locally extinct. They used to be recognized as to multiple subspecies, but that is largely by appearance. With more and more sophisticated tools available to us, I think we just have to accept the most advanced scientific evidence available, and that is to categorize lions into two subspecies, and Asiatic lion is no longer a unique subspecies from the available evidence. The other two, the couple of things that distinguish lions from other cats is, one, with a male lion, there's no doubt it is a male. Even from a distance, it's very clear with its luxuriant mane that it's a male. Here you see the female to note the difference. The other thing, of course, is lions are social. Here is a lioness with her cubs, but you also get a group of females with their young and males associating with them. A little later on, I will give you a little more details about the basis of the social organization of the species. But sexual dimorphism and sociality are two things unique. Most Indians do not recognize and celebrate the fact that India has lions. Somehow, India is identified with elephants for sure and with tigers. We don't quite, in our subconscious, pay enough attention to the fact that lions are also found in India. In fact, it's the sole surviving population of free-range. And these are wonderful animals. You can see through a few photographs. I thought very often people get to see it only in a touristy crowd and people shouting, but sense of what shall I say, the serenity at one level and the beauty at another level of these creatures. We often think of them as large, dangerous, will come and attack us and so on. And these are pictures to tell you the other story. Lions and Leopards, unlike jaguars and tigers, aren't quite comfortable in water, in the sense they don't prefer to even get their feet wet. And this is one of the unique occasions when I actually saw lions put their feet. Tigers and jaguars, as many of you know, are comfortable swimmers and even attack prey in water. Here is a pair of lions resting. They spend a lot of time during every day resting, and that's the answer I can give is, if you find lions in and around Gir, they're Asiatic lions. Looking at them, it's very difficult to distinguish. Some of the features are, all lions in Asia have this distinct belly fold, but there are African lions with belly folds. So the absence of a belly fold tells you these are African lions, but the presence could mean it's either Asiatic or African. The other thing, of course, is the top of the head. The mane is not very luxuriant in all Asiatic lions, but in African lions, you have populations of lions without manes. There are populations of lions with very luxuriant manes, like a haystack, so that you can't even see the ears. But there are also populations of lions which resemble the Asiatic. So looking at lions from a distance to determine whether they're Asiatic or African is not really possible. There are skeletal differences, there are genetic differences for which you obviously need to get the animal, you need to look at it closely and need to have certain scientific expertise to be able to determine that. Here's a good example of what an African lion looks like. You clearly can't see the ears here. Female Asiatic lions also have a belly fold, not quite as distinct. Lions evolved in Africa, came into India, and you can see much of North and Central India had lions. The only reason there has been this dramatic reduction both in their distribution range and their population is human beings. Firearms came into India, and very soon lions fell more than what tigers and leopards did, simply because lions live in groups. So you see one lion, you see many lions. Lions roar regularly, which means if you don't see them, you hear them. And lions tend to prefer flatter, more open habitats, which are easier for human beings to move and hunt, compared to tigers and leopards. The last lion outside of Gir in India was shot in 1888. And since that time, the lion population in India has been restricted in and around Gir in Saurashtra Peninsula of Gujarat. So this is the conservation issue that we really need to be focusing on as we proceed through this discussion. Two tables to tell us the trajectory of the population. I will not pay too much attention to the accuracy of these numbers, but we do need to recognize that the lions had a very close brush with extinction. About there are estimates of less than 12, less than 20, and about 50. And only last week, the government came up with the latest estimate, putting the population at 674. So from about 15-20 animals to a 674, it's of course taken a century and a half, but it's still a remarkable conservation success story. And the conservation challenge today is, how do we manage this success? Can we stay static as where we are? Will that benefit the species? This graph has two take-home messages. One is the increase in population, of course. The other thing is, on this axis, you have the government giving us figures of the area, the geographical area over which this population is spread. Later on, again, I'll refer to it as to why this poses a certain challenge. While we celebrate the increase in lion numbers, 1st of January to 31st May 2020, at one level we are saying our population is increasing. At another level, you're also seeing significant mortality rates. This is across age classes, this is across males and females. And the little bit of a black box here is, we don't quite know what is causing these deaths because the data is not available very transparently. Deaths per se should not worry us. Yes, the numbers should worry us. Where and what circumstance under which lions die need to worry us. And let's not forget, as recently as in 2018, as per government reports itself, the prevalence of canine distemper virus has been confirmed. And it's known from Africa that canine distemper virus can be deadly for lions. In the Serengeti Mara ecosystem, when it broke out in 94, I think, 1,000 lions died in a matter of 3 weeks. We can't afford that kind of risk to play out in the Gir population. This is the protected area. And all of it put together is roughly only 1,500 square kilometers. So when the Gujarat government gives us a geographical distribution of 30,000 square kilometers, only 1,500 of that is in protected area. So the vast majority of the lion distribution today is in human-dominated habitats, agricultural fields, roads, harbors, ports, storage place. I've seen pictures of lions and peanut gardens in the background of shipping containers, of trucks chasing lions, and so on and so forth. Now, while it's commendable that people are living with lions, it's not in the best interest of the lions, is my position.
So we are often used to seeing lions in open, flat grasslands or savanna. Gir is not flat, it's a series of rolling forested hills, dry deciduous forest, and this is what it looks like from a bird's eye view. And when you walk through the forest, you can see stunted teak, a lot of ziziphus, behonias, a variety of dry deciduous plants. Since moisture varies from west to east, the eastern part of Gir resembles thorny forest and savanna. It's much more open, much more lower canopy. Here is a collage to illustrate the changes that the vegetation goes through the 3 seasons, not just in terms of color, but in terms of density, structure, and also moisture availability. Monsoon is a major driving force of the ecology of the place, and till now you've largely seen the forest in browns, green, yellows and greys, and the first showers transforms the forest magically. It's amazing how quickly the plants grow, and it's a swath of green. Very seldom do people get to see this because tourism is not allowed during the monsoon. Since I was working there as a researcher, I had access to it. Another example to show you how these lions are lions of the forest. Here is a pride resting under a banyan tree, and here is a male peeking. Lions are not the only large cat of this forest. There's a thriving population of leopards. It's a very diurnal population of leopards. I've seen leopards nearly 200 times in the 4 years I was there. Of course, the leopard's ability to be arboreal is what enables it to overlap and survive. And wildlife in Gir, in the Wildlife Sanctuary Park, has to also contend with local communities. These are the Maldaris, pastoralists who graze buffaloes in the forest, and then in those days used to convert their milk into ghee as the product of commerce, and they have very small thorn enclosed settlements called nesses in which they live with their livestock. Gir is also home to very diverse and dense prey species. Cheetah, the most common, Sambar, the next most common, and also the preferred prey of the lions. Other prey species include nilgai, chinkara, chausinga, wild pig, langur, porcupine, peafowl, and much more. Here are the tools of the trade as far as the lion is concerned. Those canine teeth, 2 in the lower jaw and 2 in the upper jaw. Absolutely essential for them to hunt. These are the killing tools, either biting through the throat or occasionally even clamping down on the nostrils and strangling the prey to death. Not well illustrated here, those 2 front paws are also equally important to bring the prey down and while the killing bite is being. Lions have what is called as a feast and famine routine. They don't get to feed daily, but when they get to feed a large male lion like this, and if he's been hungry and not eaten for 5-6 days, can easily put away 30 to 40 kilograms of meat in one sitting. And then just wait 2-3 days, drink water, rest, move a little, digest, and then start looking for prey again. Very efficient when it comes to utilization. Here you see the skull of a cheetah in velvet. The antlers have been chewn down, the eyes have been eaten, and the rest of the carcass has very little meat. So there is absolutely no wastage. They're extremely efficient in utilization of their carcass. Few pictures to illustrate them feeding. Here a male lion is applying its modified molars called carnassial teeth to cut chunks of meat from the carcass. Obviously, lions have no ability of chewing their meat. Once they open the carcass, they're just biting through, swallowing up chunks of meat. And here you see the paws used to stabilize the prey as it feeds on it. Few more pictures of it. Here feeding on a cheetah, and here a pride feeding on cheetah again. Here's a single lioness on a Nilgai bull kill. This is a radio-collared animal, so I know its weight and things like that. And the Nilgai bull should have been at least 2-3 times its weight. Lions continue to feed on livestock. There is livestock both within the sanctuary as well as around it, and you can't blame the lions for getting it. But lions inside the park, inside the protected area and outside the protected area are somewhat distinctly different in their behavior. Since lions outside are disturbed much more, they tend to be much more aggressive. Very important changes in the ecology of the species. The first scientific study established that bulk of what it was feeding was on livestock, while my study showed a complete reversal of trends, with bulk of what it was feeding was wild prey, cheetah, sambar, wild pig, and so on. And what has enabled this shift is a management intervention where seasonal migration of livestock into the forest was stopped, and that allowed the vegetation to grow, allowed the prey some space and time, and the prey population from in the late 60s, early 70s of about 10-12,000 zoomed to nearly 65-70,000 when we were doing our field work, and has since grown further. And the lions and leopards have just tracked this increased availability of wild prey. So we often look at lions as social, and we call a group of lions as pride, but the pride is only related females and their dependent offspring. The males are not really part of a pride. Males have their own setup called coalition. Prides stay in the same location generation after generation, while the coalition males have limited tenure over a pride. It can be 2-3 years to maximum 4, in very, very rare instances 5 years. And this is what I mean by a pride. You can see at least 3 generations of lions here, 3 adult females, 2 sub-adults, 1 slightly older cub, and 2 younger cubs. And prides don't have to necessarily always be together, but when they meet, they will meet peacefully and they will stay together. But sometimes you can see them in subsets of smaller numbers, sometimes you can see them as loners. And here is 2 members of a 5-member male coalition, and from the same group 3 more. So again, males also can coalesce into the full coalition size. It's quite normal for coalitions to be 2 or 3. Anything larger than 3 is unusual, but coalitions of 7 males, up to 7 males, have been recorded. Here a male lion is expressing a behavior called Famine, which is basically test receptivity of the female. The mating, and when you see a male lion so close to a female, you're almost always sure that they are a mating pair. Mating is a loud and raucous affair. It can last anything from 3 to 7 days. And when you see animals like this, you don't have to catch them mating, but you know they are a mating pair. Here are a few pictures to illustrate the act. And once he ejaculates, the female will turn around and slap him on his face to get him off her back. And that's it's a survival technique, nothing meant to injure the male, but very often he gets slapped. So at the end of a mating episode, you often find the male's face crashed and bleeding. There is mating throughout the year, but a distinct seasonality in late winter, early summer being the peak mating. And if you look at cubs, the gestation period being 110 days, late winter, early summer being the peak of the birth of the cubs. There's again a certain logic to this. If cubs are born early midsummer, when water becomes limiting, that means prey will congregate around limited water holes. That increases the chances of successful hunting by the females, thereby enabling better provision of food both for the lactating female as well as for the growing cubs. So this is data there, Meena's data, my PhD student, 10 litters, having 23 cubs over 1 year, average litter size of about 2.3, which is well within the normal range of observed. Infanticide is very much prevalent. Males, when they take over a territory, will kill young lactating cubs. Sometimes females can defend the cubs successfully, but more often than not, males are able to kill. And the only reason they do that is because their tenure in a pride is limited. They want the females to be available for their mating so that they can pass on their genes to the next generation. Males constantly are fighting, defending their territory, pick up injuries like this, completely normal for them. They seem to have the resilience and capabilities of healing. Such injuries should never be intervened with. In India, we are very hands-on with our management. We don't allow nature to play its role. And I think even if you take a lion out of its normal range for a day or two, that has impacts on how the social organization plays itself out. Here, a pair of males patrolling its territory. They love to walk and roar and mark. They tend to prefer man-made roads. I mean, it's soft sand, there are no thorns, it's a clear path. And lions can sometimes go up to 32 kilometers in a single evening. But it's quite normal for them to move anything between 3 to 10 kilometers. And what are they defending? They're basically defending females and their young, their contribution to the next generation. And how do they defend? Primarily, they have two signaling systems, roaring, and here you see a male sitting and roaring. Roars are short duration, long distance signaling systems. Lions tend to roar very regularly, 3-4 times an hour, from just before sunset till about a couple of hours after sunrise. And the roar is a signal depending on who the receiver is. If his coalition partners are receiving it, if his pride members are receiving it, it's like saying, "Hi, hello, I'm here, you don't have nothing to worry about." But if it is other males and other pride members, not part of his pride, receiving it, it's more like a warning to them. I am here, I am strong, I am roaring, I am defending my territory. Don't come and mess with me. So, and each lion can recognize each other from their individual roars. The other signaling system is marking. And scent marking is squirts of urine carrying pheromones, which is again having an individual imprint. So when lions are patrolling every 20-30 meters, they will go up to a tree trunk or a rock and scent mark. The scent mark is a short distance but longer duration signaling system. These can last anything up to a week, 10-12 days, depending on the weather conditions. And they will constantly keep coming back and remarking. So if other males are trying to challenge territorial males and find scent marks are not replenished regularly, that is a sign for them that the resident lions are either weak or they are not capable of patrolling. And those are the signals they use to try and challenge older territorial males. Dr. John Sington with a blue shirt, India's first wildlife biologist. He was my PhD supervisor, and believe it or not, the person in camouflage clothing is me. Picture from 1989 with one of our radio-collared animals. It's the first long-term radio-collaring study of lions in India, and we did 9 tranquilizations with 8 animals. 1 collar needed to be replaced. A pretty rudimentary equipment at that point of time. Here is a wooden frame with like a charpai with a rope used as a stretcher to carry the animal and weigh it. And once you have the collared animals out, it just kept me very busy. And since it's an undulating terrain, I had to keep climbing hills on a regular basis to get signals. You might think lions are easy to see, but their home ranges can be anything up to 150-160 square kilometers. Huge help to be able to do that. Enables us to produce maps like this. Imagine this is at least 50 kilometers we're talking about, and if you didn't have a collar, there's no way that even if you saw the animal there, that you would recognize it to be the same animal. With more data points, you can start constructing home ranges. Now, ecology is all fine, and I got into ecology primarily to contribute to conservation. Or is it about habitats and functional ecosystems? What are the time frames we need to plan with when we work with conservation? Is it a few days, a month, few months, few years, decades? What about, especially in the Indian context, the rights of local community? What about the justice frame that we work with? How inclusive are our conservation model? Are there costs of conservation? Because we always portray conservation as the right thing to do, the good thing to do. But are there costs? And if there are costs, who bears these costs? And if there are benefits, who's reaping these benefits? Over the years, I've learned that this is a good frame for at least me, and I would encourage everybody working in conservation to at least in private address these questions for themselves. Getting back to a slide I had shown you earlier, we have now established that the protected area is only 1,500 square kilometers. If the distribution of the lion population is over 30,000 square kilometers, that is 28,500 square kilometers which is non-protected, which is people's habitat, which is villages, towns, cities. ports. I mean, name it. It's bizarre that such a large number of lions are in human habitations. Imagine wherever we are living, opening our door and seeing a lion outside. Is that what we desire? Is it good for the species? Is it good for the people? While at one level we can pat ourselves on the back that the numbers have gone up, but from a real-time conservation perspective, how good are these numbers? Now, here is a collage of maps. The first map, of course, is the India map. It shows you where all these lions currently are found. And then you see the Gir protected area and you see the larger area in which they are distributed. And you don't see very much protected area. There are small bits of 10 square kilometers there, 20 square kilometers there. Nothing like the large patch of Gir. And even based on their official numbers from the last census in 2015, you can see more than 500 lions were reported, of which 300 lions were within the protected area and more than 200 lions were outside the protected area. And what does that mean? Here you see a wild lion resting, and what do you see in the background? Two people on a motorcycle. And this is within the protected area, lion having to navigate railway tracks. And they are having to navigate railway tracks outside. Not very long ago, one lion was run over by a train. Lions have been run over by trucks. They get electrocuted. They fall into open wells. They attack people. People get killed. So this is the real life conservation that we are dealing with. Additional to that is all our lions are in one location, which is very much similar to having all eggs in one basket, which is a risky scenario. And that is why I was commissioned to study the lions to inform a translocation effort, whether it's feasible and so on. Fortunately, we have this wonderful tract of forest called Kuno in western Madhya Pradesh. And you see the river Kuno here, a perennial tributary of the Chambal River. Very diverse, very productive forest. Some pictures to illustrate that. Wonderful productive grasslands. When we did the survey in 93-94, there was also problems with it, the resident livestock population, and hence the recommendation was Kuno should be, at least 800 square kilometers should be human free to allow the ecology to revive and then become the place for lions to be translocated. Lions are dying. No way they can deny it. In the Gujarat Assembly, over 2 years, only last year they said nearly 200 lions have died. And this year, in 5 months, we've lost 92 lions for whatever reason, including disease. So somebody filed a case in the Supreme Court in 2002, or was it 2006? I forget now. I was in 2012 contacted by the Supreme Court. Every week, more or less, I was going from from Bangalore to Delhi. And eventually on the 15th of April, the court gave its order. The order was to translocate lions within 6 months. We are in June 2020, a full 7 years after the court's order. Unfortunately, extremely nuanced, forward-looking, well-informed judgment. I'm just displaying some text for us to, I'm quoting from the judgment to see how much preparation and research the judges had done and articulating their vision for conservation in this country. But reasons extraneous to science and conservation have really prevented us to move forward. So one of the orders was to constitute an expert committee. I'm a member of that expert committee. The committee was constituted in June or July of 2013. It met last in December of 2016. It has not met for nearly 4 years now. And we met in Kuno. We looked at what has happened. We found that 24 villages have been moved. More than 1,500 families. Prey base has come back. Forest is very good shape. The management capacity is there. And in the middle of all of this, somebody filed a contempt petition saying, why has the lions not been moved? But the government has gotten away by saying, oh, we'll hold meetings or something. And that was in 2018. So it's also 2 years since the contempt petition was dismissed. So there is a stalemate on this. After all this, CDV has come, babesiosis has come, and dozens of lions have died. I think we are tempting fate. We're sitting on a ticking time bomb. Last 4 or 5 slides to end on a personal note. This is my first picture of a lion, December of 1985. And I was kind of more or less planted in the middle of Gir. in those days, Wildlife Institute, I mean, it's an exciting place, but not very organized. Oh, there are lions in Gir, go and study them. More or less, that was the summary of the advice I got. And I went there, I spent 4 days, I heard lions, I saw their droppings, I saw tracks, I saw kill remains, but I couldn't see the animal. I'd quit a marketing career to get into this, and I was thinking, have I made a mistake? If I can't see an animal as large as lion, how am I going to study it for my PhD? Last evening, I had a 10-15-year-old boy as the local guide with me. Out of the bush, 4 lions came. First time I'm seeing a large cat at such close quarters on foot. I froze. I didn't know what is going to happen. So in my broken Hindi, I kind of whispered, kya karna hai, kya karna hai? He said, chup chup. So I said, chup chup. And I stood, held my breath more or less. Then I realized, oh God, I have binoculars, cameras, I should do something with them. By the time I focused, 3 of those lions had disappeared into the bush, and I got this picture. Not a great picture, but very proud of the fact that I could take a picture. Took me about 6 months to do this. You see me within handshaking distance of these animals. Not to say that I'm a Tarzan or Phantom or something like that. Not to say that these lions are not dangerous. Just that in those days, if you needed to observe lions, you just had a pair of binoculars. And if you need to individually identify them, you needed to look at what are called as vibrissae, spot patterns, scars on their face, ear tears, and so on. And in the dense vegetation of Gir, if you're even 25-30 meters away, you could barely see them. So you had to somehow negotiate and navigate your way to get close enough to observe them. Here's a picture of a male, a subaltern male resting. I took this picture, he heard the camera shutter go, and look at his reaction. Not of anger, not being disturbed, just curious. I mean, what was that? Did a leaf fall, or what was that noise? So that's what these animals are, amazing animals. I mean, through my narration and pictures, I've shown you what they're capable of when it comes to predation and behaving like a lion. At the same time, they somehow seem to be able to tolerate human presence at such close quarters. And to top it all, here is a photograph of an adult male sleeping lion, wide angle, with my own shadow in the frame. I mean, I won't advise anybody to do it, but when I was doing, I was young, foolish, not married, all of that, but also I had the confidence and knowledge of these animals. I mean, it's not as if you see the animal and immediately walk up. These are often negotiated settlements over several hours that allows you to get so close to them. But this is really the challenge of conservation in this country. Tremendous wildlife populations, growing wildlife populations, which have to live with hazards like this. This is the boundary of the national park and wildlife sanctuary. You have public transport buses going. I'm not saying we should deny services to people. Are there better ways of managing them? How much more fragmentation are we going to allow? How much more development are we going to allow into islands of wilderness in India's landscape? I want to conclude by thanking several people for giving permission, supporting my study. Meena, my PhD student, who updated on the information, the wonderful field crew I have, and some of the pictures were contributed by my photographer friend.
So, Abhin, one of the things that I've been thinking of and I wanted to discuss with you is, since we know that lion reintroductions are possible from captive bred populations, why is it that we are not considering using zoo populations to reintroduce Asiatic lions into Kuno, which is ready and waiting for them?
At least a couple of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
The more important reason is reintroduction itself is a bit of a gamble. Mm-hmm. It cannot be guaranteed to succeed. Mm-hmm. There are challenges there. Wild to wild is having much higher chances of succeeding. Captive to wild is a much more involved process. It has to be planned even before the birth of the cubs that need to be released in the wild. It is going to take a much longer time frame, much greater investment to be able to do that. And the chances of success are much lower. My question, Latika, is, while this is a technical question, I think we need to also view it as a rule of law question for India. The Supreme Court has ordered in 2030. As citizens of this country, as government of this country, what excuse do we have in not complying with that order?
Can we actually now start raising questions about whether the Gujarat government has the best interest of the species at heart, and what is it that is not allowing the Prime Minister to follow rules set by the Supreme Court of the country that he is now, guiding? So
Good point. I think citizens have to ask this question because the lions belongs to all of us and much more. I think it's an international heritage. And if we care for this, and if we think translocation is the right thing to do, and if we respect the Supreme Court, I think we are well within our rights to ask this question. But the only request is we need to be decent and stick to facts and not be seen as pointing fingers. This whole thing, us versus them, will often focus on the wrong things and not the real goal of what we need to be focused on.
I mean, I'm finding a lot of this is happening, but it's not only just with the lions. I mean, just calling the working people of the country migrant labor was something that also made this us and them distinction, whereas you're just citizens of the country and you're trained and you're skilled in a particular form of work, and you have gone in search of work to another part of your country. And
absolutely,
it's just showing the mindset of what people think. I mean, it's the same with the lions, it's same with the people. So I think it's a big mindset change that needs to happen. Okay, so the other question we need to understand as just normal people, not as you and me scientists talking about this, is the question people often have: what happens if tigers and lions overlap? In reintroduction programs, there might be many places where they've now reintroduced tigers. So we've had local extinctions in Panna, in Sariska, and they've reintroduced tigers and very successfully. So why is it that we could have not reintroduced lions into these areas? And are there not other spaces within Gujarat? Could we not take that approach and at least start a second population within Gujarat itself?
See, the primary motive of translocation is to create geographical separation. Nothing has prevented the government of Gujarat, if there are suitable habitats with sufficient space and prey, to set up a second population. This is a conversation which has been brewing more or less from 1960s. When I was doing my field work also, they kept talking about Barda. But Barda is only 110 or 120 or 150 square kilometers. That's one lion pride's home range. It obviously will not be sufficient.
No.
Plus, it is less than 200 kilometers as a crow flies from Gir. And today, that 30,000 square kilometer of lion distribution is right at the edge of Barda anyway.
Yeah.
So, to me, the answer from a conservation perspective will not be just to look within Gujarat. Let Gujarat have 10 more lion populations. I have no problem with it. But if you want to reduce risk, if you want to increase conservation chances for free-ranging lions, putting it out in Kuno, which is about 1,000 kilometers away, which is in a different political dispensation. You don't know from which form the risk would come. Is it a forest fire? Is it a disease? Is it a cyclone, a tsunami? Oh, who knows? It is a political decision for whatever reason. And separating across that kind of distance definitely makes sense. Your other thing about introducing of lions in Panna or in Sariska, see, historically, lions have had overlapping distribution with tigers. If you look at that map of distribution in central and northern India, they had a fairly overlapping distribution. But it is at a landscape level. It is not at an individual home range or habitat level. We know the Indian landscape is quite complex. You have flat, open areas, and a few kilometers later, you will get slightly rolling hills, undulating ravines, denser, wetter, drier. So the way they should have negotiated this is the wetter, denser habitats being tiger habitat, the flatter, drier habitats being lion habitat. So I don't think they exactly had overlapping range, but at the landscape level they were. And they would have occasionally clashed, they would have occasionally had negative interactions. But there is no point in saying who won. It's often a question, if it's a lion versus tiger fight, who wins?
Yeah,
that doesn't matter.
No.
But Panna and Sariska having been declared as tiger reserves, it might not be correct to move lions into them.
Okay, what are the chances, looking at the way lion population is now spreading over 30,000 square kilometers and that they're moving towards the border? Can we hope and pray for a miracle that they actually cross into MP? And then what happens? Then do they belong to MP or do they belong to Gujarat? Will we have to give them back? Can they continue to stay on? Can we pick them up and put them into Kuno? I mean, just out of curiosity.
It's interesting you should ask this. There are at least 3 instances. One of a lion moving into Diu. Diu is a union territory. It doesn't. But Gujarat quickly moved, and before anybody knew, got the lion back into Gujarat. We've had instances of tiger and doe moving from Madhya Pradesh into Gujarat. Fortunately, MP didn't say, oh, those were Madhya Pradesh tigers and Madhya Pradesh doe, and bring it back. So animals know no political boundaries, right? They're just moving as ecology and social organization dictates. Yeah. But it's very unlikely that the lions will get that far, because it will have to then navigate towns of the size of Rajkot and Ahmedabad and national highways and things like that. And even if it happens, it's probably talking in the time scale of decades. My worry is, till 2018, we were cocksure and under some false impression that CDV will not come to India. It is now proven canine distemper virus is now more or less established in the lion population. We have lost, as per the government records, at least a couple of dozen lions to that disease.
Okay, so just now talking extreme solutions, because sometimes the most absurd things work, okay? We recently had the Prime Minister doing this amazing series with Bear Grylls in Corbett, and most unexpected for people like you and me to see this happening. But could we reach out and get somebody like him to actually champion the cause of lions in India and get the Prime Minister to take a look at this and actually do something?
Latika, I am convinced there is no tactic or strategy that we should keep out.
Okay.
I think the fundamental thing is whether the motivations are sincere and pure, and we don't get used in that process. That is my only consideration.
Yeah. So I think, this is just an idea that came to me while I was watching that, episode some time ago. And I just thought maybe if we can get some people like that to understand what the issue is, any help from any quarters is good help.
Absolutely.
So, maybe we should try that. Maybe as one of the things we do after this is actually contact the man and see what we can do about this. What about has any help come from Africa for disease management? What is happening? Also, the whole problem. We had a tiger in Panna which contracted rabies from a feral dog. There's canine distemper, there's rabies, there's all of these things that can become transmitted into these animals. So what happens? Are people actually vaccinating and inoculating them? How do you protect against it? What are the government rules on this?
See, this has been an issue we learned as students. So I'm talking of, this is not new. It's been something around since the 1980s.
Yes.
It is not a good thing to inoculate, vaccinate wild animals. It is okay to do it in zoos.
Okay.
But in free-ranging situation, because many of them need booster doses and so on and so forth, that level of intervention is not good. What is better is to throw a ring of immunity around by vaccinating domestic livestock, dogs, and so on and so forth. Plus, it is not just lions which carry. Mongooses carry canine distemper virus. So how many animals and individuals will you go and vaccinate in the wild? But first, we need surveillance. We need some sample surveys going on a regular basis to find out what is the prevalence levels of what disease. And the pandemic, the ongoing COVID pandemic is also not just animal health. Human health also requires that kind of surveillance.
Yes.
So the One Health framework, which has again been around for a decade plus, we really need to implement in this country for the welfare of India, India's human population, for its livestock population, and equally for its wild animal population. It will look at all in a comprehensive way, because diseases are jumping across from either domestic dogs onto lions and so on, or from bats and pangolins onto human beings. That you need a unified, comprehensive approach.
So is there a site or any place that people who are watching this talk can access to get information on what is being proposed for this?
I am, in the last year or so, been involved with a national mission on biodiversity and human well-being. We have 7 broad approaches to achieve this, one of which is One Health. So we are working with the Principal Scientific Advisor's Office and the MOF, the Ministry of Environment, through the National Biodiversity Authority, as well as ICMR and other related agencies. ICMR has a One Health Institute in Nagpur. So there is some movement there, but it's far from the level at which we need to be operating.
Okay, so also now another question that I think is really important in today's context is, what would you suggest that the role be for the private sector? How would you like them to get involved? Is there something they can do besides funding research? Is there, a way that they can work together with the government to improve the situation for the Asiatic lion?
I think fundamentally, not just for Asiatic lion, but for the environment and ecology and wildlife conservation in this country, and maybe even climate change, private sector has to recognize continued destruction of natural habitats and environment is a complete no-no. We just have to find models of development which don't depend on exploitation of natural resources. If that principle is truly engaged with, I think in many ways, several of the battles that we have to engage with will not be there. Because it's quite easy to take on small sections of this project and that project and either financially or otherwise support when the bigger juggernaut of destruction is going on. So it's a David versus Goliath kind of battle. To me, that broader principle needs to become the operating principle for our private sector.
Okay, fantastic. And, there's been a lot of concern even recently about a lot of highway projects that are taking place, all sorts of places all over India. And we're talking about some places now, finally, they're agreeing to do some elevated roads. And some places they're actually planning to go underground. But some places they're still going through the park. And I keep telling them that it's better to prevent the wound than to have to treat injury. And it's more cost effective and it works better for everybody in the long run. But what is your view on this? I mean, even if it costs us a little bit extra to go skirt around a park, is that a better route to take? Or is it better to do an elevated road or an underground tunnel? What is your view on this?
There's no question, Latika, we are left with fragments of our wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
Further fragmentation is not an option we have.
Mm-hmm.
And costs today are computed in a very narrow way.
Mm-hmm.
How are we costing the costs just in terms of finance for COVID-19? Mm-hmm. Where did the money come from? Who is paying these costs? Forget the human suffering. I mean, there is a whole host of suffering that can never be reduced to rupees and things like that. But if we just take the narrow way of measuring it using financial costs, how are we accounting for it? And that is the kind of cost we are ending up paying by not investing in sustainable development or environment friendly development. All the engineering solutions do not understand ecology. You might say, I will not kill tigers and elephants. What about insects? What about the light pollution? What about the sound pollution? What about the air pollution? What about the damage you do to hydrology? I mean, I could go on and on.
When somebody told me they're doing a long underground tunnel through an entire national park, I was just horrified. I said, hydrology, all of the life that lives underground, the effect of vibration, we're not even taking into account all of that. And then the seepage of effluents that are deposited in the underground tunnel, and that going out into the surrounding soil. So electrical vibrations, because you'll have to have lighting underground. There's just endless amounts of stuff. So, for me, still an elevated road is the better option out of all of the evils, because merely shifting a road to the edge of the national park doesn't mean, like we agreed, that it's actually out of the habitat for the animals. It just means you're moving it to one side of a line that you have drawn on paper. So it's incredible. I think also what I'd also like to remind everyone is that it's amazing that we have countries and neighbors like Bhutan and Nepal, and wildlife comes and goes over the political borders with no issues at all. And we've never claimed and said, that's our elephant or your rhino. It just comes and goes. And tigers live, we even have national parks that we share.
Manas, Sundarbans with Bangladesh.
Yes, absolutely.
And Himalayan wildlife goes into Pakistan also.
Yes.
And China.
Yes. No issues at all there. So I think it's quite amazing that Gujarat has this issue with its own country. It's just incredible at the narrow-mindedness of this whole.
Latika, one thing there, I don't think we should only blame Gujarat. I think to a significant extent, it's also the government of India, because the Supreme Court basically directed government of India, because it is the union that it's an interstate matter.
Yes.
Plus, I would blame all of ourselves also. As citizens, we are not holding the government accountable enough.
Yes.
We need to be asking questions of the government as to why they're not doing. That pressure also needs to happen.
Yeah. So I also wanted to, just going back to all of these lions roaming everywhere, is anybody actually monitoring what is happening? Is there a team right now who does this? Or is it just the forest department, as and when something shows up, that they report it?
I think to a large extent, there is some forest department presence, but the forest department is not geared to operate in primarily human habitats. It's not their mandate. So their presence there is minimal. I don't think there is much independent research going on now, which is unfortunate. I think there are enough and more people interested in answering these questions. But the idea is to control the information. So once you have independent researchers, your ability to control the information is not. And that's a problem not just with Gujarat, all across the country. Trying to do wildlife research, and the things we used to do, is becoming more and more of a challenge.
So is it possible to actually do a citizens movement and involve citizen science, which is a new term that a lot of people are talking about, to help with this monitoring? And we could just use an app on a phone, and people could use it and report back to us, and we could do it in local regional languages, and really use that as an information gathering tool. Is that possible? Can we look at that?
Definitely. The only challenge would be to make sure that we have at least a neutral stance from the forest department. Okay. It will be ideal if they see value and support, but trying to do it with the objections of the forest department might.
That's not possible.
Yeah, and also might put local people in a hot spot.
Yes. Okay, wonderful. Ravi, thank you. We could probably talk forever. It's one of those things. Super to connect. If I'm ever in Bangalore, I shall love to meet you and catch up again for another chat over a coffee.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
for making time for this.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye. Today I have a very special guest here, Shivang Mehta, the Canine Brand Ambassador and an absolutely fantastic wildlife photographer and one of my close friends. He's an acclaimed author with 3 fantastic books, 2 on cats, 1 on tigers and 1 on leopards in Jaguar, and 1 on cats and other animals called Chasing Horizons, Learning from Africa. And you have to see those books to see the quality of his photographs. They're just incredible.